Daniel chapter 2. We've looked at the first 23 verses. If you remember back with me, Daniel was put in a very difficult situation. He was told that if he didn't interpret a dream, not just him, but all of the different spiritual leaders that were in Babylon at the time, didn't interpret the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, that they were going to be cut into tiny, tiny little pieces. And Daniel gets wind of it, and it says that Daniel asked the king if he can have a little bit of time in order to go and petition his God, to go, ask for the answers that the king was asking for. So Daniel kind of gathers together with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they have a little prayer meeting. And as they begin to pray, Daniel has a vision of the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. And now Daniel's about to go and explain to Nebuchadnezzar what had transpired in his bedroom when no one else could have known, no one else had the ability to know. And what Daniel's going to declare is that God is the one who knows everything. That God is the one who knows not only what happens, in someone's private life, but he knows what's happening in the kingdoms of man from beginning to end. That's what Daniel's going to reveal to King Nebuchadnezzar. What all of the Gentile powers that be, he's going to explain to them, who they are before they come into power. Guys, only God can do these things, right? And I think for you and for me, it should be something that builds our faith. It helps us have a greater understanding of who God is. And so as we come to this passage tonight, my prayer is as we look at this, it would just kind of put things into perspective for us when it comes to who God is and the power that he is able to display. And so let's pick up chapter 2, look at verse 24. Watch what happens here. It says, "Therefore, Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and he said thus to him, 'Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation.'" Now, Daniel, if you remember back last week as we looked at this passage, Daniel was giving God all the praise, all the glory. He was acknowledging that God, you're the one who reveals deep and secret things. And then now he comes to the commander of Nebuchadnezzar's army that had been given this task of killing all of the wise men of Babylon because they weren't able to interpret the dream for him. And so he comes to him and he says, "Look, I want you to don't hurt anybody. Don't go and start killing off all of these wise men." Now think about Daniel becomes an intercessor for all of the wise men of Babylon. The Chaldeans, we're told, the magicians, the sorcerers, all of these guys, Daniel intercedes for them. And what an incredible picture that is, that, Daniel had compassion even for these guys that were going in error. They were believing lies. They didn't know the God of Daniel, but still Daniel was concerned for their well-being. And I think what a great reminder for us. There's a lot of people who are heading down a wrong direction, and it shouldn't be that we're, trying to make them our enemies. We need to be interceding for them. We need to be asking the God of heaven to spare them, to open up their eyes, to, intervene, our enemies who despise us because of who we are and what we believe, right? We need to be men who are praying and women who are praying for them, interceding for them, asking God to unveil their eyes to the things that were going on. And Daniel says, "Oh, don't destroy them." I would imagine some of these guys, were jealous of Daniel and wanted to see his demise. We know when we get to Daniel chapter 6, it's when Darius is king, so the Medo-Persian Empire was already in place, and they set Daniel up in order to have him killed because they didn't like what Daniel stood for, because they were jealous that Daniel had such favor before the king, and so they were trying to rid themselves of Daniel. But Daniel didn't hold those things against them. Daniel is a guy who was just saying, God, I want to be an instrument in your hand. And so he intercedes for these men. Notice the next verse. It says, then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king, and he said thus to him, I have found a man. I wonder if he's trying to get a little bit of credit here. I found the guy that can interpret your dream, king, right? And somehow he's going to get some kind of reward for finding him. And he says, I found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. And so here Arioch comes and he says, King, I got someone claiming that they can tell you what happened. The things that you were asking your wise men to tell you, there's this young Jewish boy. Now remember, Daniel's 17, 18 years old at this point. And he's coming before a king to declare to him what none of his counselors were able to declare to him. This little boy is now going to be set up to reign in Babylon because he's the only one who has the ability to understand the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. Just like God, isn't it? Just like God to, allow circumstance to happen that would be your demise in order to use it to elevate to a position that otherwise would not have, been accessible to you. That's how God works. He always does the things that are beyond understanding, right? And once again, God's doing something that is just outside of the norm. And so he's standing before the king. Look at verse 26. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, that was his Babylonian name, Daniel his Hebrew name. He says, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel, are you able to declare to me everything that I saw in this dream and then tell me what it means? And so Daniel is going to have the opportunity to talk before King Nebuchadnezzar, and it says, Daniel answered in the presence of the king, and he said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king, but there's a God in heaven who reveals secrets. He has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the vision of your head upon your bed were these. Now, what a great introduction to Daniel's interpretation. He says, look, let me tell you something, King. I really don't have the ability to tell you anything. None of your wise men had the ability to tell anything, but there's a God in heaven who's able to tell you everything. Now, Daniel isn't looking to get the credit for what God had revealed to him. Daniel simply wanted the king to know that it's God who does these things, not him. He never wanted to touch God's glory. He never wanted the attention to be on Daniel. It was always about the God who's able to reveal secrets. You watch some of these television personalities. I don't call them pastors, but television personalities. And they're always looking to put the attention on themselves. And, and some of those just, man, it makes my skin crawl to watch, how they want everything to be about them, their healing ministry, their great ability to prophesy. And he just kind of stand back and go, man, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes when you got to stand before the God who reveals secrets. Because God doesn't share his glory with no man. No one can take credit for anything that God does, right? Because it's not you who does it. It's God who does it. It's God's the one who gives you all the abilities you have. Daniel was wanting to be very clear with King Nebuchadnezzar. Look, I don't have the answers for you, but there's a God in heaven who does. I think that's what is so incredible about God's word, is that God has revealed to us his heart, his plans. He's revealed it to us from the beginning of time to the end of time. He's laid out for us the things that you and I could never know otherwise. God's the revealer of things. I would have never known how we got here had God not told us how we got here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We would never know how this world was going to consume, how it's going to end, right? It's going to burn with a fervent heat. The scripture tells us that all of this is going to come to nothing. But it's heading somewhere. And the God who reveals secrets is able to give us clarity and understanding that you and I would be clueless about had he not revealed it to us. And he's coming to King Nebuchadnezzar. Now think about this. King Nebuchadnezzar had already conquered the known world. There was really nothing left for him to do but enjoy the fruits of his labor. He's just kind of like, okay, now what? What do I do now? Everything's been defeated. There's no territory to really take on anymore. Took over Egypt, took over Babylon, over Jerusalem, I should say. He's living in Babylon, but he took over, all of the powers that be in that day. Nebuchadnezzar had defeated them all. And it's as though Nebuchadnezzar sitting on his bed that night and just going, God, what's after this? I mean, I don't even know if he was talking to God. He was just like, what else is there? And as he's on his bed, God showed him. And that's what Daniel had said to him there in verse 28. He says, he's made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. God's revealed to you, Nebuchadnezzar, from this time until the end, the powers that will come into play. And notice what he says there at the end of that. Your dream and the vision you had were upon your bed were these. And can you imagine, Nebuchadnezzar going, okay, Daniel, you're about to tell me what no one else was able to tell me. You're going to be able to tell me what happened in a dream that I had that no one else knew about. And this God that you claim knows secrets is going to reveal all of it to me. And then Daniel begins to explain to him in detail the things that had happened in his dream. Notice there in verse 29. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while you were in your bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has it made known to you what will be. Notice how confident Daniel is. Like, God's told you the things that will be. Not might be or could be or plausibly could be. He says, God's telling you the things that will be. It's a done deal. This is what's going to happen. They will be, and then watch this. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes, who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. He goes, look, I'm no one special, king. I don't have any greater ability than any other man on the face of the earth. None of your soothsayers or any of your magicians, or I'm just a nobody. But God's going to spare us, and he's going to reveal the secrets of your heart right now. Again, Daniel going the extra mile to make sure King Nebuchadnezzar doesn't give him the credit, but that he gives God the credit. And I really believe Daniel is desiring to see King Nebuchadnezzar come to know who the God of heaven is. I think the reason he keeps reiterating that is because he wanted him to come to that same knowledge of God that he had possessed. And it's interesting that he says, the God who reveals secrets. Again, the God who reveals secrets. He just told you, the secrets that you had while you were on your bed. You were pondering, what's going to happen now? What's left? And so he says, verse 31, but you, O king, were watching, and behold, this great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image head was of fine gold, its chest and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And you watched while the stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and it broke them in pieces. Then the iron and the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain, and it filled the whole earth. Now, can you imagine what King Nebuchadnezzar's at this point thinking? He just gave me the details of everything that happened in my dream. This image made up of all these different elements: gold, silver, bronze, iron, and iron mixed with clay. And King Nebuchadnezzar, would have been in awe of it all. He says it was awesome. That word means, it was awe-inspiring. As King Nebuchadnezzar hadn't slept for days. I probably why he wanted to chop them to little pieces. He was deprived of sleep. Angry. What did all this mean? What is all this about? And these guys come in there, they're just like, tell us what it was all about, and then we'll tell you what it was. And he goes, you guys are just going to give me a bunch of mumbo jumbo. No one's going to tell me the truth, so you got to, lay it all out with me, or I'm going to kill all of you. And then he hears the interpretation or the explanation of what that dream was, or the actual dream itself. And Nebuchadnezzar knows at this point, and Daniel has had to have heard from God. There's no other way for him to know what he's just declared to me. There's no other way for him to have had that kind of insight into the things that he just told me right now. So Daniel, anything he tells me from this point forward has to be truth. See, God has a way of solidifying things in our hearts. It's not that we'll always act upon what God solidifies. Nebuchadnezzar, we're going to find out in chapter 3, he's going to build an image of gold. 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. And what he was doing is, after him processing everything that Daniel tells him, he's declaring, let me tell you something, there's not going to be another kingdom after me. I'm it, and I'm going to build an image, because he's going to be the head of gold. He says, I'm going to be the head of gold, I'm going to be the chest, I'm going to be the thighs, and I'm going to be the feet, and it's all gold. And what he was doing was he was defying what God had declared to him. God was wrong. There's not going to be another kingdom after me. I'm the kingdom, and I'm going to make this image of gold that's going to not just be the head, but it's going to be the whole body, and everyone's going to bow down to it. See, just because God reveals something to you doesn't mean that you're going to get it, or you're going to submit to it, or you're going to embrace it. You can rebel against it. That's okay, exactly. And God has a way of even breaking down Nebuchadnezzar after that. But what's interesting is that Daniel got his attention, I would think. I imagine Nebuchadnezzar there, probably bug-eyed at this point, just kind of like, okay, you know something. Now tell me what it means. I mean, that was the big deal. He wanted to know what does all this mean. And then watch this, verse 36. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. Now notice that he's going to use that word "we." Now, we don't know if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are there with him. Maybe he's giving them the credit because they were praying with him as well. And, he's kind of saying, hey, we're in this together. And he's saying we. Maybe he's making a reference to God who's revealing these things. He says, we are going to tell you the interpretation of it before the king. And you'll find him use that word "we" because Daniel wasn't wanting to get the credit for himself. We are going to tell you. Look at verse 37. You, O king, are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. Now, Daniel reminds King Nebuchadnezzar that the only reason you're in the position that you're in is because God put you there. God's the one who made you the king and gave you all the power that you possess, all of the authority that you possess, all the gifts that you have. Everything you have, it's come from God. And King Nebuchadnezzar, needed to be reminded of that. But Daniel, think about this. Daniel, the courage that this young boy has to say, King, you're really nobody. God gave you everything. Everyone wants to think we're self-made. I did it my way. Just because I'm stronger or I'm smarter or I had more initiative or I had more, get up and go or more tenacity. You see, anything you have is because God gave it to you. You have some abilities. God gave it to you. And Daniel reminds King Nebuchadnezzar, God gave you the power that you have. God gave you the kingdom that you have. God gave you the strength that you have. God gave you all the glory that you are able to partake in because God gave it to you. And if we would just give God the glory for all the gifts that He's given us, all the blessings that He's given us, all the talents that He's given us, then we would be in a place where we're usable. You see, God doesn't use instruments that aren't willing to yield to Him. He's looking for instruments that are willing to yield to Him, to acknowledge this is where my power comes from, this is where my wisdom comes from. And so the first thing that Daniel declares is, look, God's given you all this. Look at verse 38. Now the prophecy begins. And this is where it gets quite interesting. Wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, He has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You, king, are the head of gold. Now he's declaring that Babylon was the head of gold. The image that he had seen was that first world power that had come into play. The head of gold. Babylon was known for its abundance of gold. They had went and they had taken all of the cities of wealth and they had accumulated for themselves. And Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, the weightiest of all of the materials that he's going to describe here. He said, all of it's been given to you. God's the one who the God of heaven gave you all of these things, and he's given you control of all of these things. And this is what you are. Now Babylon was an empire that lasted about 66 years. King Nebuchadnezzar was already a very successful military leader, and then his dad dies, and he comes in and he actually took Babylon to its heights. And in the image that he had seen, there was that first layer, that first, the top of that image, the head of gold. And he goes, that's you. That's who you are. And then he says, look at verse 39. But after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over the earth. Now he describes the second and the third kingdom here, and he doesn't give a lot of attention here. When we get to Daniel chapter 7, he's going to go into greater detail about these two kingdoms. The Medo-Persian Empire, from 539 to 331 BC. The Medo-Persian Empire reigned for about 208 years. It was an empire that would have favor toward the Jews. God's going to raise up Cyrus, and Cyrus is going to allow the Jews at 70 years to return back into Jerusalem. So God had to get rid of the Babylonian Empire in order to have the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire come into place. Now Persia is present-day Iran. And it's interesting that there in Daniel, and let's take a peek. Look at Daniel chapter 8. We'll just get a real quick, because we'll be making our way there. Daniel reveals to us who that second empire is. It's another vision that he has, but he tells us the details of it a little in greater detail. He says there in verse 20 of chapter 8, he says, the ram which you saw having two horns, these are the kings of the Media and Persia. Media and Persia. He lays out, and then he's going to tell verse 21, and we won't come back here, but look at verse 21. And the male goat is the kingdom of Greece, the large horn that is between the eyes is the first king. And he tells us about the Medo-Persian Empire and the Greek Empire. And very, very, very quickly, now again, as we're going through Daniel, we'll go into greater detail about those two kingdoms, and he's going to give great, detail about their kingdom and some of the things they did. Now, we know that not only the Medo-Persians, but as they were defeated by the Greeks, by Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, that third kingdom, he was the commander of that kingdom, and he so quickly defeated all the powers that be. By the time he was 33 years old, he had already conquered the known world. He was depressed because there was no one else to beat up. I mean, that was Alexander the Great. And God had foretold these things hundreds of years before they ever came to be. He had revealed them to King Nebuchadnezzar. He had revealed them to Daniel. Greater detail as we get into chapter 8 and some of the references there in chapter 7, and just incredible historical for you and I, but for them it was prophecy. God foretelling the things to come. And then he talks about, verse 40, the fourth kingdom. It shall be strong as iron, and as much as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. A reference to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire lasted over 500 years. Interesting that Daniel never mentions them as the Roman Empire. He just mentions them as this fourth kingdom that's going to come. We know it to be the Roman Empire. We know it because Rome is the power that defeated Greece. We know it to be because Daniel is going to talk about the Antichrist in Daniel chapter 7. And the Antichrist is going to come from this fourth kingdom. And what's interesting is it's the same kingdom that was in power when Christ was crucified. So we know it to be the Roman Empire. It's interesting that the Romans were never defeated. They decayed from within. There was never a power that really rose up to overthrow Rome. It was because of the moral decline that had happened in Rome that Rome ceased to be the power that it was. See, at the beginning of Rome, they took great pride in their morals. They used to brag about not one divorce had happened under the Roman Empire. They used to brag about the family structure and how Rome had such an incredible family, importance. They understood that whoever the family was, that was the strength of a nation. By the end of the reign of Rome, then divorce was common. Morals had declined. Pleasure had become more important than freedom. Edward Gibbon wrote a book. It's called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It was published in 1776. And he said there were 5 reasons for the fall of the Roman Empire. Number 1, the undermining of the dignity and the sanctity of the home, which is the basis of human society. That was the first building block that began to be deteriorated. Number 2, higher and higher taxes, the spending of public money for free bread and circuses for the populace. Just everything became a handout. The workforce began to deteriorate. People wanted everything for free. They wanted to be entertained. Number 3, the mad craze for pleasure, sports becoming every year more exciting and more brutal and more immoral. We even have the Colosseums where they would gather to watch the beast destroy humans, Christians specifically. Entertainment, just feeding the pleasure of watching others do brutal things. And it seemed to just escalate. I enjoy watching football games. I enjoy sports. I love to see a good hit. But then, you just look at our society, it's becoming more and more violent, more and more brutal. UFC's kind of superseding all the other sports. And, you just look at some of that. And I love a good fight. I love boxing, but you just look at, it's just becoming more and more brutal. Entertaining the masses. It's what happened in Rome. I think you and I are watching the same degree of deterioration of a society. Number 4, he put, the building of great armaments when the great enemy was within, the decay of individual responsibility. They wanted to build bigger weapons to defend themselves, but the problem wasn't the enemy on the outside, the problem was the enemy on the inside. It was no one wanting to take individual responsibility for themselves. I think the idea of socialism, where everyone, just want everything for free. I want, we should, no one should really have to work for anything any longer. Everyone, the government should take care of me. And that becomes the mentality of society that's in decline. Again, I think these are the same patterns that we're watching in our own nation. Number 5, and the last thing he said, the decay of religion, fading into mere form, losing touch with life, losing power to guide the people. He says, when and it wasn't even Christianity. It was just this idea of the decay of religion, that no one, wanted any responsibility or any higher power in their life whatsoever. So that there was no moral standard. And so Rome was never defeated. They just dissipated because of their own demise, their own, pleasure and their own wants. And pretty soon the taxation, they couldn't keep up with it, and it just started to just deteriorate the culture. And it's interesting that Rome is going to be revived again. The only one of these nations that was never defeated is going to come back to life. That's what Daniel's dream is going to declare. Notice what it says there in verse 46. Whereas you saw the feet of and the toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. He's speaking of another kingdom mixed in with the other kingdom, the iron kingdom. It's also going to have iron mixed with clay. But the thing about iron and clay is they don't intermingle. So he says, they didn't mix well. And scholars still kind of, ponder, what is he exactly saying? That the iron, the Roman part of this is still going to be in play, but the clay part of it, it's going to be a lot more fragile. The 10 toes. He makes reference to. What's interesting is when you get to the book of Revelation, he talks about the kingdom that 10 kings are going to come out of, and those 10 kings are going to give all of their power to one king, which is going to be the Antichrist. This final kingdom. And this final kingdom is a kingdom that has yet to be established. I think we're watching all of it begin to take place. I think he's talking about this one world government that is going to, be headed up, and it's going to have its base in the Roman Empire. When you get to Daniel chapter 7, look at verse 24 real quick, and we'll jump back real quick. But just Daniel chapter 7, verse 24. Verse 24, verse 23 actually. And in the latter times of their kingdom, then the transgressions have reached their fullness. A king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully, and shall prosper and thrive. And he shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people. Now, he's talking about this final king. The final king that's going to come into play, and he is going to have sinister schemes. In Revelation chapter 17, watch, turn there real quick. The 17th chapter. In the interpretation of the vision that John had in verse 16, he says, and the 10 horns which you saw on the beast, which these will hate the harlot. They'll make her desolate and naked, eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put in their hearts to fulfill his purpose, to be of one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman whom you saw in that great city, which reigns over the kings of the earth. Now, what John is seeing, he's saying there's coming out of this new Roman Empire, there's going to be 10 kings are going to have power, and it's a reference to the 10 toes at the bottom of that idol or that statue that's established. And these 10 kings are going to be like-minded. They're going to have the same agenda, because they're not working on their own agenda. They're working under a far greater agenda. Demonic, satanic. They're going to be willing to give up their power in order to give it to this one king. It's going to be the Antichrist, who's going to be the devil incarnate. And he's going to make war with God and with all of God's people, the saints. That's his agenda. And what's incredible is you look at this prophecy, God is telling Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar now, he's telling them, here's the powers that be. And I believe you and I are there in that latter part of it, the very end of it. We've seen, all of these other world powers come. It's history for us. But there's one that has yet to come, and this is this iron mixed with clay. Jesus would say, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, because he's talking to the Jews, he says, flee the city. It's something that has not come into play yet, but I believe you and I are quite possibly the generation that's going to watch this last kingdom form. There's a lot of talk right now of a one world government. The only way that we can save the earth is if, we remove all of our borders and we just become one, one agenda, one mind, one heart. But the problem is that one heart isn't God's heart. It's in opposition to God. This next verse has intrigued me, and it's intrigued me for years. And I just look at verse 43. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. That's baffled me. Every time I've taught through the book of Daniel, I kind of just I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. Mingled with the seed of men. What's he talking about? Now, I'm not claiming to be a prophet, but I think what's intrigued me about this is he's talking about something intermingling with mankind, the iron mixed with clay. There's a lot of talk about transhumanism right now. There's a lot of talk about, we can fix humanity if we just put a little chip inside of man, and we can get everyone kind of working together on the same page. And when I read that verse, I just went, man, that makes mingled with the seed of men, iron mixed with clay, mingled with the seed of men. I mean, what's he referencing here? Again, I ran out of time, to be honest with you, because I was like, man, I think I went down the rabbit trail. When you're studying God's word and you're just kind of like, wait a second, this never kind of had any kind, I never saw this before. It didn't make sense before. But then you start to go, man, I wonder what it is that Daniel is declaring here. Interesting. Silicon Valley. Silicone made of sand, clay. Iron, all of the computer components, iron mixed. I don't know. I just again intrigued. I'm in a couple of weeks I might come back to this verse and just say, hey guys, I spent a couple days looking this up. Because it was just like, man, what is it that God is unveiling? We know in Daniel chapter 13 that it says that everyone's going to be chipped. Everyone's going to put a mark on their forehead or their hand in order to buy, sell, or trade. So we know that is something that is going to transpire during the tribulation period. Again, don't go, you're a heretic. That's not what it means. I don't know. But it definitely intrigued me as I was reading that and studying that. It's going to be mixed with the seed of men. They will not adhere to one another. They're not going to coexist together. It's not going to work. But he says, just like iron doesn't mix with clay, you can't get clay and iron to form together. You can't make one element between the two elements. They'll always separate. And he's saying that's what he's declaring here. Then look at verse 44. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms. And I love this. It shall stand forever. All the kingdoms of man, they have a shelf life. As a nation, over 200 years, we've been a nation. Over 250 years. But we only, nations come and go. Nebuchadnezzar is going to try to defy that. He's going to build this image of gold, saying, my nation's never going to end. And God's going, you're not in control. The Medo-Persian Empire, you're not in control. The Greece, the Grecian Empire, they're not in control. The Roman Empire, they end up self-imploding. The kingdoms of men are all short-lived. But he's talking about a kingdom that has no end. That'll be forever and ever and ever. See, that's the kingdom I want to live for. That's a kingdom where I want to invest my life into. That's a kingdom that I want to spend, eternity in. All the other kingdoms, are all futile. It's this kingdom. And he's telling us that this sixth kingdom that he's making reference to, this revived Roman Empire, it's going to have a short life. But the kingdom that's coming, it's the kingdom worth living for. And notice how he describes it in verse 45. Inasmuch as you saw the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, and the clay, and the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. Wow. He says that whole image that you saw, it got crushed by this one stone to powder. And it was a reference to Christ and his kingdom. It's what everything else is leading up to. Guys, this is what it's all about. All these other kingdoms that come and go, that's not where it's all about. It's all about the kingdom to come. All of it revolves around it. All of it's for it. All of it's to give opportunity for humanity, the seed of men, to choose. What kingdom do you want to be part of? The one that dissolves, the one that gets crushed, the one that gets turned into powder, or the one that's going to last forever? Over and over again, Jesus is a reference to as the rock, the stone cut without hands. In Psalm 118:22, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Isaiah 28:16, therefore thus says the Lord, behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act hastily. Isaiah 8:14. He'll be a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the house of Israel, and a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. It's all a reference to Christ. The mountain cut out without hands comes and it just, annihilates all the kingdoms of the earth. crushes them. One of my favorite Psalms, turn with me to Psalm chapter 2. Look at verse 1. Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bonds in pieces and cast their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. He shall speak to them in his wrath and distress them in his deep displeasure. Yet I have set my king on the holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I'll give you the nations for your inheritance and the ends of the earth for your possession. Here it is. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. Now, therefore, be wise, O kings. Be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, and his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are those who put their trust in him. Wow. He says, everyone who tries to rebel against him, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get crushed. Because it's his kingdom. That's the eternal kingdom, the one that never ends, the one that never is defeated. It's forever and ever and ever. And Daniel, can you imagine Daniel watching all of this being explained to him as he had saw all of this transpire, and now the revelation of what it all meant is being explained to him, and Daniel's there, just taking all of this in, and then here comes verse 45 where Daniel says, and as much as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, it broke in pieces iron, bronze, clay, silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. He goes, let me tell you, no matter what you do, Nebuchadnezzar, you're not going to change what God has declared. No matter what your schemes are, what your plans are, no matter how hard you try, you cannot change what God has declared. And for me, that's so comforting. Everything God said is going to come to pass. The devil can't, change 666 to 667. He can't, thwart one of the things that God has declared that are going to be. It's already declared, and it's going to happen. Eternity, heaven. All of the trials and tribulations that you and I are going to face, God's already, it's in his hands, and he'll give you the strength and the power to endure them if you'll put your trust in him. You and I are living in what I would call perilous times. And I think it's going to escalate. I really do. I think, it's going to get tougher and tougher. But I also know that God is able to intervene in every circumstance and situation that you have or I have. Are we willing to trust him? Are we willing to say, God, none of this is outside of your might, your power. I'm debating. Okay, verse 46. And King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face. He prostrated before Daniel and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. And the king answered Daniel and he said, truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and is revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. And the king promoted Daniel, and he gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and the chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Nebuchadnezzar at the end of it said, man, Daniel, I know that your God is the one who's in control. And guys, I pray as we're going through this, we're going to get into greater detail. Some of these things that God's revealed, especially when we get into chapter 7 and 8 and 9, and man, incredible. Chapter 11 and 12, man, amazing. Prophecy that God has declared. And as we're going through this, that our faith would be encouraged, knowing that God is in control of all the affairs of man.